Wow, that was a long gospel. 45 verses, although, for your edification, that gospel also contains the shortest verse in the Bible. In that translation, it's Jesus began to weep, but in the King James Version, it's just Jesus wept. So that's kind of fun. Each week, when I sit down with the readings and prepare to write my sermon, I begin by looking for what is at the heart of that particular gospel reading. How is the good news of Jesus being expressed in that reading? So this week, I did the same thing. I had the readings in front of me, the commentaries that I use as well, and I began reading in search of the heart of this week's gospel. And I couldn't find it. Not because the good news of Jesus isn't expressed in the gospel this week, but because the expressions of the good news of Jesus are so many and so varied that it became a labyrinthine task to get to the heart of it. It wasn't an experience of getting lost, as in a maze. It was a true labyrinth with many twists and turns. It was impossible to keep track. So I thought I would ask you, where is the good news of Jesus expressed in this week's gospel for you? Is it in God raising Lazarus to life after he had been dead 4 days? Is it in Mary's trust in Jesus that leads her to say to him, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died"? Is it in the compassion of Jesus, who, even though he knows exactly what he's going to do, and that he is going to do it for the glory of God, is still moved to tears at the loss of his friend Lazarus, and for the family and friends of Lazarus who mourn him? Is the good news for you when Lazarus stands before them, still wearing the cloth wrappings of his burial, and Jesus says, "Unbind him and let him go"? Where is the good news for you? What in this gospel grabs you and tugs at your heart and leaves you hungry for more? For me, it's in all those places. Thus my dilemma. So I decided to engage the gospel a different way this week. Instead of looking for what it says about the good news of Jesus, I thought that maybe we could look this week at what the gospel doesn't say. It is our human nature and our practice as a culture to celebrate when people get what they deserve. And I mean this in positive and negative ways both. When a student works hard and earns a good grade, we celebrate because they are deserving of that grade. When someone commits a crime, take, for example, the awful shooting this week at Fort Hood, we hope that the criminal will get what they deserve, that justice will be served. That's the way we order our society, and it's the way that we order our own lives. We are incensed when people don't get what they deserve. When a student who has an excellent GPA and has done all the right extracurricular activities, when that student doesn't get into the right college, we're upset. They have not gotten what we believe they deserve. Or when someone who is guilty of a crime is allowed to go free, it makes us angry because they have not gotten what they deserve. So here's the question. Does Lazarus get what he deserves? Does Lazarus deserve to be raised from his grave and restored to life? I mean, isn't death just part of life for all of us? What is it about Lazarus that makes him deserving of what he gets? More deserving than any other human being that's ever lived and died. Now, before I go on, I want to remind you about the Gospel of John. And this is just Melissa's perspective on it. So bear that in mind. But when I read the Gospel of John, I see the sacramentality of that gospel. In other words, the outward and visible. In the outward and visible, there is always an inward and spiritual truth. So in today's gospel, we have the outward and visible, Lazarus being raised from the dead. The inward and spiritual grace in that is that while it's Lazarus who's being raised from the dead, that grace is available to us all. We are always being called into new life through Christ. We are always being called out of our deaths into life. So bear that in mind. What this gospel doesn't say is that this really is not about Lazarus being deserving. It's not about anything Lazarus has done. It's simply about who God is and how God loves us. Lazarus receives the grace of God. None of us are deserving of this. None of us can do a single thing to earn that grace. The grace of God is simply given, not because of what we do or don't do, but because of who God is. In the reading from Ezekiel, we have a wonderful and beautiful clue into this unearned grace of God. Through the voice of the prophet Ezekiel, God tells us that God will raise us up out of our graves, and then we will know that God is God. God acts, and then we know. It's not that we receive life because we profess the right faith in God or answer the questions correctly. We receive life because God brings us into life. And that's when we know God. A lot of Christian teaching out there tells us that in order to make it as Christians, we have to believe in God first. It's up to us. Now, to me, that sounds like we have to do something to earn it, to deserve it. But that's not what the gospel says. It says that God believes in us. Jesus believes in us. And when our eyes are open to that reality, then we come to believe in God. We are quickly approaching Palm Sunday, Holy Week, and the celebration of Easter. So next Sunday is Palm Sunday. As we come into this most holy season of the church year, I invite you to pray and consider this grace and love of God, this good news of Jesus. That what we receive from God, we receive not because of anything we have done to earn it, not because we deserve it, but simply because of who God is. What we receive from God is love, because God first loves us. Let this carry you through Palm Sunday and Holy Week. See what perspective it opens up for you. Let this unearned and undeserved love of God show you the meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection in your life. Let this unearned and undeserved love of God unbind your heart from its desire to earn and to be deserving, and just simply receive what God has already given you. You know, this really is the heart of the good news of Jesus. There is simply nothing any of us can do to earn or be deserving of God's love for us. And yet, God loves us all the same.